There is a chance that the next game in the God of War series will be a return to Greek mythology, although likely not in the way you are expecting. So let me explain why that's the case and my theories on what this game would look like. Let's start by discussing where this new Greek title was first mentioned, as I'm of course not pulling that idea out of thin air. The potential existence of a new Greek game in the series was mentioned by reliable journalist and leaker Jeff Grubb, who heard from his sources that Sony is set to release a God of War side story set in Greece and that it should be releasing this year. Tom Henderson, another very reliable journalist and leaker, has also made mention of a return to Greece, although he was unsure what form this title would take. Later during Jeff's podcast, he at least dispels the idea that this is about a remaster of the original Greek trilogy, which a lot of people speculated about. So that then points to a Miles Morales style title starring Kratos in Greek mythology that should come out this year. And yeah, obviously that leaves us with a ton of questions, as this certainly was not on my bingo card. We've done a ton of speculation regarding where the series goes next, and I've always believed that if we would get a spin-off title to ease the weight for the next mainline game, it would feature Atreus. But after giving this idea some thought, I actually think it makes a lot of sense, and there are a ton of potential hints to our return already hidden in the Norse saga. While you can play those games without playing God of War 1 through 3, both stories have a major moment that heavily relies on events from Kratos' Greek past. For God of War 2018, it is him recovering the Blades of Chaos while being haunted by a vision of Athena. And for Ragnarok, it's Kratos' reconciliation with Freya, which happened at least in part because Kratos shared the loss of his daughter Calliope. Both events make sense in the context of their respective scenes, but they hit much harder if you have the full story fresh in the back of your head. The surprise DLC Valhalla doubled down on these connections to the original trilogy, as the story is largely based on Kratos coming to terms with the person he used to be, which again, you have an image of who he was painted by the stories he shared with Atreus and Mimir, but unless you've played those older titles, you're missing out on a lot. Some of these stories are also shared in the DLC, but you're effectively getting the PowerPoint recap of some of the most important moments, so there's still a lot more that's only available in those old games. You are of course getting a taste of the old gameplay as well, as Valhalla includes returning enemies from Greek mythology and even a returning weapon in the form of the Blade of Olympus. Fun statistic by the way, 15.6% of players unlock the Dark Odyssey trophy that unlocks once you have the sword in the Valhalla DLC, and only 9% of players unlock the God of Hope trophy, which unlocks the blade for your New Game Plus playthrough. In both cases, the numbers are definitely higher than I was expecting, but considering 43% of players reach the final boss of the main story, a major part of the player base has not seen or played with this classic weapon. So you would think then that Sony Santa Monica are looking for a good excuse to reuse these assets, especially since they released them in a free update. I mean, we even have the look and armor of OG Kratos in this new setting, so a ton of building blocks for a Greek title starring Kratos have already been made. The big question that remains then is what Sony Santa Monica wants to make with these building blocks, and this is where we get into more speculative territory. Now this video is based on a rumor by very reliable sources, but it's still good to keep in mind that nothing has been confirmed yet. For the next part, however, I'll be discussing my theories on what this game could be next, which are just that, my theories. I'm of course more than curious to hear yours too, so make sure to leave them in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video so far, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this. Alright, before I get into what I think this Greek game could be, I want to rule out something first, because I do not believe this story is a continuation of Ragnarok and Valhalla, for many different reasons. For one, God of War so far has been focused on mythologies with a pantheon of gods, and after the events of God of War 3, there's basically no Greek pantheon remaining. Kratos also makes it very clear he still has things he wants to do in the Norse realms, and especially the ending of Valhalla reinforces the idea that his current intent is to work with Freya and the others to restore the realms. So whatever pulls him away from that has to be very urgent, which I think is something they're saving for the next mainline entry. And besides, the most logical reason for him to return to Greece is to reconcile with his past, which is something he has already done during the story of Valhalla. Valhalla. Another theory I have is based on Kratos' newest weapon, the Draupnir spear. Obviously that weapon belongs in the Norse saga, but as Kratos mentions, the spear is the first weapon a Spartan learns. So the fact that we now have a moveset for that weapon type means we could potentially see Kratos as a soldier in the Spartan army, even before he became the ghost of Sparta. I honestly really like the idea of us following Kratos as he eventually becomes Ares' champion and have it end with the tragedy of him killing his wife and daughter, but I have to admit that it is a bit unlikely. Both the Norse and Greek saga are based on the power fantasy of playing, you know, a literal god, so degrading Kratos back to a less powerful form is likely not the way to go. So what I instead think is more likely, especially considering those assets in the DLC I mentioned, is a return to Kratos' past as the champion of Ares and later the god of war. As Jeff Grubb already stated, this is likely not in the form of a remaster or remake of the original trilogy. While Sony of course has a bit of a reputation when it comes to remakes and remasters, I think the amount of work it takes to remake 3 full games is not worth the effort, especially since they want to move on with the series eventually as well. So what if instead we get a revised version of that story condensed into a single game rather than 3 separate entries? I personally think this makes a lot of sense, so allow me to make my case. For one, the point of this game would be to catch people up to speed on Kratos' past, and that's much less intimidating if you only have to play one game. You can technically go back and play the older games on PS5 right now, but if we look at the duration of these games according to how long to beat, you're looking at 31 hours of playtime if you just play the main story. So that is a pretty big time investment, but if you can repackage that story into a 10-15 hour experience with modernized gameplay, it becomes much less intimidating. The older titles also have some elements that and I think Sony too, would consider less than appropriate in a modern title, so doing a revised version of the story makes it easy to skip over those parts and focus on the stuff that is important for Kratos' character. And while game development is never easy, this should in theory be a relatively easy game to make. The groundwork for your story, your levels, and even your enemies and bosses has already been laid out, and some of that stuff is already available in the new engine and style of gameplay. While they are an integral part of Kratos' toolset in the Norse saga, the Blades of Chaos were of course his first iconic weapon, so putting those front and center and giving us access to even more attacks and combos sounds very exciting to me. I remember Eric Williams, the game director for Ragnarok, talking about them doing a greatest hits for the Blades moveset in that game, and I imagine a couple of those ideas did not make it into the final product. So they're definitely a weapon worth revisiting, and as I mentioned earlier, another major weapon, the Blade of Olympus, is also already playable in the modern engine. Since it was heavily featured in both God of War 2 and 3, I fully expect the moveset to be expanded and have it function like our second main weapon. And maybe we'll even see a short prologue of Kratos as a regular Spartan in this abridged Greek trilogy game, so they can still use the spear moveset like I mentioned earlier. Again, let me know your thoughts and theories in the comments, subscribe to not miss our next video, and leave a like on this one if you enjoyed it. We also made a video on where the series will likely go next, so you can watch it by clicking on the screen, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!